Welcome back again. You're still watching us here on The Daily Debate. Once again, I would still want to also introduce my guest, Engineer Hassan, Shabban, political analyst. Thank you very much, of course, for coming in again. Definitely when, I mean, you would very much relate to that. Maybe we were having a little bit of a chit-chat before we went back on air, and you were sort of bringing back in the memories of this era or this period. And I get very enlightened when I hear people who had witnessed actually and lived this era. And maybe the first question I'd ask them, back then, did you ever think that the Egyptian army was going to actually make it and take over this war and return back their lands?
To be honest with you, we felt a lot of bitterness after the 1967 war. There was a lot of bitterness, and we didn't really see any light in the end of the tunnel at that time. But bit by bit, actually, we started to pull ourselves together. And it was a very strange era. The people actually, there was no, you know, fence between the government and the people and the army. And we were all in the same trench together, facing a very hard time. And bit by bit, Egypt pulled itself together, and we actually started to rebuild the army. Of course, you know, the army itself was taking care with, experts were taking care of the army at that time, but a lot of civilians actually joined the army to, you know, bear the responsibility of the construction that was required to defend our homeland, because, you know, we had this great line of defense extending from Port Said all the way to maybe far better than Safaga. You know, it was, you know, it's a very long distance between, because you know, we wanted to protect the Aswan Dam. We wanted to protect a lot of construction on the River Nile. Also, we wanted to defend ourselves from the back door, because, you know, the enemy at the time had a lot of, you know, expertise in missile, and they had a very sophisticated aircraft, you know, and we actually managed to pull it together, because you know, each one of us was in it was like we were working in isolated islands. You know, I was constructing a site. I didn't know what was going on. Only
what
2 kilometers, right?
Yes, yes,
you know, I
yes.
didn't really know what was going on outside the premises where I was working. And you know, lucky, and you know, we were a little bit smart. We did not get hit any time during the construction of both locations I was in charge of at that time. One of them was in Giza, in the deserts of Giza and around Kuraymat, and the other one was in Za'farana. And we were working, and behind us there was a battalion of the army protecting us. You know, we were as contractors at that time working under the protection of the army behind us. In both locations, I think we were lucky. A lot of our friends in very adjacent locations actually were hit and injured, and some of them actually died during the construction of
certain sites. Yes, so the thing is, because as you've just said, you're in an era of defeat, so everybody is down, everybody's feeling like there's no light at the end of the tunnel, as you've said. And then you look at the other side, you're dealing with an army who's very organized, who's got sophisticated weapons. You know, your capabilities are very limited, or you thought it was at that time. And then a miracle seemed to have happened.
Exactly.
Now, a lot of experts throughout the years have actually been educating and training the people about the psychological factor that was one of the main reasons for the victory of this war, and how they realized that psychological factor can indeed sort of
Definitely.
decept the other side, even though they think they are more powerful by all means.
I used to look at the Suez Canal and wonder how can we cross this canal. You know, as a civilian, of course, I was in charge of construction, so I used to...
Mathematically speaking, by all
Exactly.
engineering measures, this is impossible.
It was a little...
I mean,
you
even
know,
they said that. They thought it needs some kind of nuclear bomb to be able to get through.
But the miracle happened, actually. You see, the bitterness that we suffered in 1967 was a motive for us not to care for our lives, actually. No matter what it will cost, we will cross, and we will have to pay the price to regain our dignity and our land. It was very miraculous, actually. We were driven by a power. You know, we didn't really care very much for mines or the enemy or anything. We did not see anything, but we wanted to prove that we are still men and we can protect our children and we protect our families back home. So I think it was a difficult time, but we've lost some very dear friends at that time. But we regained our dignity.
Yes, but the Egyptians, there's always something about this, I would like to call them a civilization, not just citizens in a country or a nation. The civilization of Egyptians are very inspiring and different, and it is miraculous indeed, because there's certain concepts about Egyptians that you don't find them in any other nation. Whether it's their determination, their solidarity, their patience, and as you've said, you know that you might not be able to make it, but it doesn't matter if you made it or not. The fact that you're standing there and actually playing your role and actually
fighting. We know
fighting.
how to die.
Exactly. And you see how that has revolved during the past 46 years. I mean, we are today in a war, but it's a different kind of a war. We're like in a fifth dimension of war phases today, and still you have these same concepts and elements in the Egyptian citizen by nature that would apply on any generation. I want to talk about the solidarity and the prosperity between the people and the army, between the people and each other, and how united they always face all the difficulties.
You see, Egyptians always respected the army. We trusted the army. You know, even the war that we are launching today against terrorism in Sinai, this is probably an extension to the war that we fought in 1973, actually. We are establishing, you know, our sovereignty over Sinai, and I think we have plans to develop Sinai right now. Prosperity is coming, and I think there is a program to actually relocate a massive number of young people to Sinai to actually, you know, keep Sinai busy with, you know, plants, factories. I think whether we like it or not, it will be very important for us to actually have a different philosophy with, you know, concerning Sinai. We regained the land 46 years ago, but we should have actually started developing Sinai at least 30 years ago.
Before I dig into the script further, and there's a lot that we need to talk about, but you know, I have to, from my position as an expert here, to be as objective as I can and see the story from the greater picture. And I must not exclude the fact that some experts have, for very long years, called it always the war of movement than the war, I mean, apart from being the war of victory, which is a concept or a truth. After 6 days, the whole war took to a different shift and turn. And from there, agreements and peace treaties was the only option to be able to stand still and keep what you've gained. What do you think about those analysts who have for a very long time called it actually a war of movement, like some kind of chess game that had stopped at some kind of stage back then?
I remember that President de Gaulle at one time, Charles de Gaulle, actually said something to our president at the time, President Sadat, that you're going to have to keep your case hot if you want to just deal with it. And I think the decision of war was a very brave decision. I think we actually launched the war, as I said, to regain our dignity and land. But again, I think that President Sadat from the beginning had a plan to actually reach a certain limit.
I mean, knowing that Israel wasn't going to be left alone from world powers after all, and that eventually they will interfere.
Actually, they were not left alone even during that war. Actually, our armed forces actually found some tankers actually had a few kilometers on their kilometer gauge. Actually, there was a supply line between a very close U.S. military base and Arish, which was part of the occupied land at that time. So Israel had a foreign, of course, support, and the U.S. made it very clear that they cannot afford to leave Israel on its own.
Definitely. And that's why it had to take a different turn.
Definitely.
But then we also have to reflect back on the role that the Arab countries were making, also collaborating with Egypt, if I may say, Syria and others. Maybe we can also reflect back on maybe the younger generations are not very much aware the prominent role Saudi Arabia did when it took the decision to cut off oil as a form of pressure. Very also brave step in support of Egypt. How did the Arab countries and their cooperation also add to this success and victory?
To be honest with you, I think King Faisal himself actually paid dearly, a very dear price for supporting us in 1973. He lost his life. He was assassinated. So, you know, similar to what happened to President Sadat. I think the Arab world actually took a great stand at that time. The United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Oman, all of our brothers and friends in the Arabian Gulf stood by us. And I think without their support, it would have been a little bit different, because actually their support to us and actually reducing the production of oil and in many cases stopping a lot of shipments to the West actually affected the war actually. And we actually, you know, managed to draw the attention of Europe and, you know, other countries to the important, you know, case in the Middle East if the Middle East stops producing oil at that time. So Saudi Arabia, again, and their leader, the late King Faisal, played a major role in this. You have to consider also that, you know, the launching of the war was a surprise to all of our friends in the Middle East. Very few people knew about it. And, you know, a country like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates.
Nobody knew that it would take place or when it would take place,
Right.
because with all the cameras and picturing, it doesn't seem like this is an army getting ready to attack, right?
Yes.
Or to actually be able
Yes.
to defend themselves if they're
The
attacked.
great deceived
That's why
plan.
it's a psychological war more
Yeah.
than it was.
Definitely. Even, you know, when the radio announced that we actually crossed the Suez Canal, it was...
I don't believe that.
You
Is
know,
that
that
true?
was
Oh
not
my
a
God.
war. That was not a war. Just another maneuver or we're launching an attack, a limited attack.
Because
But
a lot of attacks and attempted situations happened between 68 and until
Definitely.
73. And we will talk about one of those stories that are coming out to the light in just a moment. I want to be able to get to know from you, from your analysis, how, I mean, there was a new political situation that emerged and sort of came out at that point. The fact that Egypt slants our back, so there's a new political situation in the Middle East. Egypt is leading the Middle East now, so you can't deal with her the same way you thought before, 6 days before the war actually started. And a reality fact that Israel is just stuck there, like, you know, in the middle of the Middle East. How did things start to progress to reach to where we are today on a political level or on a diplomatic level?
you know, definitely.
It becomes a bit hard for an enemy to forgive you for what you did, right? How does it work politically as a political analyst?
Well, let's be honest about it. I don't think that the Israelis will never forget what we've done. But
Is it marked as a sad day for them?
it was a sad day for them,
Yom
definitely.
Kippur, I think it called.
You know, they actually had to taste the same bitterness that we tasted in 1967.
Well, it wasn't their land anyway, so you
Right.
shouldn't take something that
Right.
doesn't belong to you. Yeah.
So actually, you know, that was you know, an experience that they did not want to repeat. That was a motive for them to sign with us our peace agreement in Camp David. Let me put it this way. The 1973 war was a turning point, not for the Middle East or for Egypt, but the whole wide world. Definitely, a lot of calculations were actually redone because it was something that never really, nobody expected it, that Egypt will wake up again and regain the land, and you know, the politics at that time was a little bit different because you know, President Sadat asked the Russians to leave the country, the experts that were in our army. So that was also a very strange move because
He's never going to go to war.
Right,
Look at the
exactly,
experts. I mean,
right.
my only ally is leaving actually with all the
So-
sophisticated weapons.
that was 1972 at that time when the Russian experts left the country. So that was the beginning of the deceit plan, actually. Actually, ever since the 1973 war and what happened after that war, the assassination of President Sadat and so forth, Egypt actually managed to get back to the leading, to be one of the leaders actually, because Saudi Arabia today actually plays a very major role in the Middle East. We have to acknowledge that. But Egypt actually regained the part of the leadership that was lost at the time in the 1967 war. And ever since that time, a new pyramid of politics was being built that led to what we have today. We have a
Are
very
you sure it's
strong...
still there, the pyramid? I think part of the pyramid is still in struggle. Well, God be with our brothers and sisters in Syria anyway. Engineer Hassan, now, there's a term I see here which I personally have no idea what it would be like or what it means, but you probably tell me. What does psychological security measure mean?
The psychological security means that you feel safe. You don't really feel that you're under threat at any one time, actually. After the 1967 war, we were vulnerable, and we did not feel safe at that time. Bit by bit, our army actually managed to regain the confidence, and we started to regain the security, and this is what is meant by this term. Today, we are facing the same thing. We are trying to fight terrorism. This is a war again, and we are exposed to a lot of rumors, you know, but again, we are regaining the stability, the psychological stability.
I like how you had shifted 46 years, you know, into a flashlight sort of scene here. So it does seem to me that psychological security measures still applies today, but it applies in a different world. And
Definitely.
it really rang into my ears when you said into the break, we're in a different world today.
Yes, definitely.
Now, a lot of people will take that very lightly, but coming from someone who had lived throughout these different world phases, I would want to take a minute here and listen very carefully to what he has to say when he says that we're in a different world today.
I like to use the term that I've used earlier, and I've heard it from a friend of mine. When you look at it, you feel like that you're an alien today in comparison with what happened or what took place 46 years ago. Technology have advanced, you know, and, you know, the type of war is completely different. You're facing new technology, new methods of war, and I get the feeling sometimes that one could lose a war before starting it, actually.
That seems to be very interesting, because here I would want to pause again and tell you, well, are we more fearful today than we were back then? Are these psychological security measures that should be taken today or are being taken today much more tighter than before? 46 years ago, you already knew who your enemy was. You can see them there. You have no grudges because you're enemies by nature. Today, I'm not sure if my phone is an enemy. I'm not sure if people living around my circle could be enemies. The kind of psychological thoughts that could come in people's mind and really brainwash them would really trigger people saying, how can you change so fast? How can you change so much? How could you be affected that way? What kind of measures are we dealing with today?
To be honest with you, the technology and the espionage and, you know, became very sophisticated. Technology have advanced tremendously, and actually you can do things that at one time used to be considered fiction. So a conventional war is no longer
a direct sort. And I mean, that's what I said at the beginning of the intro. Nowadays, it's more costly to actually put boots on the ground. So you don't want to carry your armed vehicles or your sort of heavy weaponry and just land there. You can just literally be on their individual households. We have more to talk about. How can you sort of counter-defend this kind of new era of war, especially that, unfortunately, it's no longer your enemy who's at the borders or on the other side. It's unfortunately terrorist extremism and people who are being paid, well-trained, and other countries, unfortunately, who are supposed to be with you, is actually fighting for your interest and against destroying your people in national security. We will talk about that, but let's go on to the second report, October War. It embodies defense of land and sovereignty, and we'll be right back.
إننا جميعا سنحافظ عن سيادتنا. نحن نؤمن بحقنا في الحياة ونحن نؤمن بحقنا في وطننا.
إننا قتلنا وسوف نقاتل تحرير أراضينا التي أمسك بها الاحتلال الإسرائيلي سنة 67. إن مطلبنا في الحرب معروف، لا حاجة بنا لإعادة الحرب. يأتي اليوم ونحن مرفوعة هاماتنا مرتفعة راياتنا، ولكن علينا أن نعرف أن المهمة لم تنتهي بعد.
أن مصر قادرة على إعادة صياغة أي وضع لا ترضى عنه أو تقبل. مصر عصية على الانكسار، إن تحديات الحياة لا تنتهي، وقدر الشعوب العظيمة مواجهة هذه التحديات وقهرها.
The October War embodied the defense of the land and the sovereignty. It is the history of the big victory of the Egyptian and Arab army in its fourth war against Israel. Not only is it a history of crossing the canal, it is also a channel for the transit of history. October War is all about the memory of the defense of the land and the principle, sovereignty and right, the memory of the honorable Arab solidarity to defend the Arab territories. The October War between Israel and a coalition of Arab states led by Egypt and Syria started with a sudden attack on Israeli positions on Yom Kippur on October the 6th, 1973. After the defeat of June 1967, when those who lost their loyalty came out to violate the reputation of the Great Army of Egypt and accuse it of corruption, lack of resourcefulness, and letdowns in defending the homeland, the victory of October War came to prove that the Army of Egypt is the best of all. They are the loyal sons of Egypt who were able to erase defeat and turn it into a glorious victory. There had been claims that the Egyptian people lost their loyalty after the defeat of 1967 and imagined they wouldn't bear the then difficult reform measures to be able to provide weapons and supplies for the army, but the people impressed everyone with cohesion and tolerance, perseverance and patience and equanimity to face all economic difficulties until they achieved the victory of October. At that time, those who reigned over ashes tried to spoil the Egyptian-Arab relations in order to keep Egypt alone without support. But the Egyptian-Arab cohesion was evident in the victory of October, and the Arab unity and the role of Saudi Arabia, UAE, and the Gulf emerged in the most beautiful way, supporting Egypt to achieve victory.
Welcome back again. You're still watching us here on The Daily Debate. I'm still joined with Engineer Hassan Shabban, our political analyst. Engineer Hassan, now, there have been a lot of stories about what the period that took place between 1968 and 1973. There were so many small confrontations, if I may say, on a smaller level, and the Egyptians also made victory on it. A lot of people were not aware of these stories until the movie of the Passage came out, and it was of not just of great success, but there was just something about this movie that gathered people of all age groups, even the younger generation who many people believe are not interested in knowing much about politics, well, not the kind of age groups that you can put them to sit down by their own free will to watch a heavy movie like that, but they were. And then when you see the stories and the way even the script was written, it seems to be that these kind of soft power that's being made today or directed is definitely in need to be taking place today to face the different kind of war strategies that are being targeting Egypt.
To remind us, I mean, we need to regain our memory, actually. We're a great nation, and we have to deal with ourselves as a great nation. Indeed, we're under pressure, but we should regain our confidence. This movie actually brought tears to my eyes because I've witnessed the defeat and the victory. And
God bless you, today you're seeing all these new changes and alterations and technology coming in.
Definitely. I'm witnessing the whole stage is being changed. The actors, everybody is changing, but still I remember the roots. I remember where it all started, and I'm witnessing the changes. I'm trying to cope with it, but it is a different world today. But we needed the new generation to watch this movie, actually. It was memories coming alive again. And we needed to tell everybody, remember where we were and what did we go through and where we stand today.
And maybe possibly who we are, which is also very important. Mind you, as a researcher, there's a theory in our field that's called the cultivation theory, which consists of the fact that what you sort of send in terms of signals or messages to an individual gradually on a consistent long period of time shapes their ideologies and shapes their mentalities.
Very possible, yes.
We're talking about adding this to sort of remind Egyptians and the rest of the world of who we are, not just about past and present. There's the religious dialogue reform. There is changing of culture and mentality and the renovation of the Egyptian citizen that the president is also very keen and, about and spoke a number of times. Where do you see all this together coming into a package to be able to work on developing the Egyptian human being?
I've expected after January 25th and June 30th that we will witness a rebirth of our culture. I mean, we need a cultural revolution, actually. And I was hoping that President Sisi will lead this revolution, actually, to regain a lot of things that we've lost over the years, actually.
In terms of identity, you mean? Or in terms of
identity, even the
traditions, concepts?
A lot of, all of that, all at the same time. Actually, even religion, actually, we did not come up with procedures, actually, that we can take out of the religion, you know, to have a better society, better community, and better people. I think the absence of our culture actually gave a space to the religious culture to fill in the space, actually. And we've lost our identity for some time. I think we need to regain our identity. I hope that the opening of the new Egyptian Museum is the beginning of regaining our identity. We need better arts, better culture, better literature, everything. We need to look into every little detail that was ruined in the last 50, 60 years, actually.
So you do believe art, culture, media, etc. should be renovated to be able to meet with these external factors that are affecting the Egyptian citizens or have revolved in affecting the Egyptian citizens.
Very true, yes.
Engineer Hassan Shabban, as a person who have had the honor to witness, live the period and also participate even with construction during the October War, with all these mixed feelings and the ups and downs that have been happening during the past 46 years, how do you feel today?
I feel that we could have actually invested our victory in 1973 in a better way. And we should have gained the same momentum.
That's when you look back and reflect after 46 years. But this is the thing. We can't see the future, Engineer Hassan. We don't know where we will be. Otherwise, a lot of things would have changed in our lives and our decisions. Don't you agree?
Again, we have today a chance that we could actually make up the lost time, actually. I see a lot of development everywhere. We have a very ambitious president, aggressive, he loves his country, transparent, brave. I hope that we realize that our politics in the Middle East actually forms an obstacle to a lot of very evil plans, actually.
And it's always God's will that protects us after all.
Right, and hopefully, I hope that we realize that we have all to get together, because the coming period is very difficult period. This is the finale of the Middle East scenario that we started like 70 years ago.
Unfortunately, that brings us to the end of our lovely conversation. I wish it stayed on forever, but we have a top stories coming up next. Engineer Hassan Shabban, political analyst, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. And I think there's no much more sentence that I could recall or phrase that I may recall to end my show than just long live Egypt, basically. I'm Yasmin Bakir signing off. Thank you for watching.